So we talked about solving quadratics by factoring. We talked about special cases that are perfect squares and that we can solve by doing the square root method. The one thing that we have to remember when we're doing the square root is that it's positive and negative when you take the square root. But unfortunately, there will be times when neither factoring nor square root is possible. But the graphing of the quadratic would still exist. So listen to these words again. If you go back in your brain to when we did some factoring, and there were some of them could not be factored, they are still quadratics, which means that they are still parabolas. They actually do exist. You could graph them. But to figure out where they cross the x-axis, to solve for x when y is 0, would not be permissible by factoring or by taking the square root. So the other method, which is the foolproof method, which works regardless, is using a formula that the mathematicians discovered works every time to solve for the value of x when y is 0 in a quadratic function. This method is called the quadratic formula. If you remember that, the quadratic trinomial's standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, because we're solving for when y is equal to 0. So instead of y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, we have equals 0. When you're solving for x, you use this formula. Basically, you put b value here and here, a here, and c here. You substitute and you solve. The most difficult part about using this is remembering that if b is negative, when you square it, it becomes positive, and remembering your order of operations. Now, the quadratic formula is something that you are going to have to memorize, but there is a song that we all know that will help us memorize it. And this is to the tune of Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And it goes like this. X equals opposite b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Mathematically, and we can go into the reasons to why this formula always works, but really not until you get to Algebra 2 can you really understand the mathematical principles as to why they discovered this. So I'm not going to bore you with that part, but just know that it exists. The quadratic formula is used to solve things that could not be factored. So for example, if I was to give you something, okay, if I did 3x squared minus 5x minus 7 equals 0, and I did product of AC, I would get 3 times negative 7 is negative 21. That adds up to negative 5. There's no numbers that multiply to negative 21 that add to negative 5. There are none. So this quadratic trinomial is, as far as I can see, unfactorable. I can't use the square root method, but you have to be able to solve it. The only way you could see if it's no solution is after you try the quadratic formula. We know that a is 3, b is negative 5, and c is negative 7. So if we use the quadratic formula, we're going to find x equals the opposite of negative 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared, that's 25, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is negative 7, divided by 2 times a, which is 3. Now, what I'm going to do is actually do the mathematics stuff. I'm going to actually it's just a math problem now, and I have a calculator, so I don't have that much to worry about. Please do not rely on calculator for you punching stuff in and it doing everything for you. You have to do the order of operations. That means x is going to equal, okay, so far, order of operations, I have 5 plus or minus. Inside the square root, I have to do, well, 25 is going to stay. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12 times negative 7 is positive 84 all over 2 times 3, which is 6. Not done yet, because I still have to get a value for x, an actual single number. The next step down the line is x equals 5 is going to be added and then subtracted to the square root of, well, 25 plus 84 is 109. And then I'm going to divide by 6. I have to take the square root of 109, but that's not a perfect square. So what I need to do is figure out what the square root of 109 is. On your calculator, if you do the square root of 109, 10.4, about. So now I have to continue, and then the next step is look at the value of x is equal to 5 plus 10.4 divided by 6, and then 5 minus 10.4 divided by 6. And when I do 5 plus 10.4, I get 15.4, and 15.4 divided by 6 . 2.57, which is 2.6, and then 5 minus 10.4 is, and then that divided by 6 is equal to?
Negative 0.9.
X is equal to negative 0.9. These are the two answers. These are the two values of x.
You wouldn't keep it like
2.6 and negative 0.9. So this is basically this whole section where we are using the quadratic formula in order to find the value of x when y is 0. And in order to do that, what you do is you calculate using the quadratic formula. Just please be sure that when you're using the quadratic formula, you are plugging in the correct a's, b's, and c's, first of all. Second of all, that you remember that it's the first part is x equals the opposite of b. So if b is negative, it becomes positive. Now, what questions or what problems might you anticipate that you may run into when you are using a square root in an operation?
After you do the b squared minus 4ac and you end up with a negative, you're trying to find the
Exactly.
negative root.
What's going to happen if on the inside of the square root, once I get that done, once I do b squared minus 4ac, if I go to take the square root of it, what if that whole value is negative? Can I take the square root of a negative?
No.
So what do you think that's going to mean in terms of solutions? No solution. Very good. Now, this part of the quadratic formula is a very special part because this on the inside is going to tell me if I have any solutions. So listen to that part again, because this is part of one of the major concepts of this section. B squared minus 4ac is a very special part of the quadratic formula because once you do that operation, it's going to tell you whether you have 0 solutions or if you have one answer or if you have 2 answers. Can you guys tell me, looking at square roots, what kind of a number or which number would I have to have inside here that I'm going to get no solution for? A negative, correct. A negative number on the inside of the square root is going to give you no solution. On the same note, can you tell me what number, when you take the square root of it, you only get one answer and you don't get plus or minus? Because there's no plus or minus of it.
Like a perfect square.
Well,
Not a perfect square.
The square root of 16 is positive and negative 4. The square root of 1 is positive and negative 1. What number is the only number that doesn't have a positive and a negative of it? Very good. If the b squared minus 4ac, you do the work and it gives you the value of 0, when you take the square root of 0, you're only going to get one answer. There's no positive and negative. So this is what we call having only one solution. If b squared minus 4ac gives you the value of 0, it means you're only going to get one answer. Once you get the answer, you're not going to add it and subtract it from 0. It's not plus or minus 0 because it doesn't make the difference. And then on the last line, the square root of any other perfect square or any other number, if it's an integer, a positive number, the square root of a positive number will always give you a positive and a negative. So that is two solutions. Because of the significance of the b squared minus 4ac, because of how important it is to quadratic formulas, b squared minus 4ac has a special name. b squared minus 4ac is called the discriminant. It is called the discriminant because it discriminates how many answers you're going to get. It doesn't tell you what the answers are because you still have to do the whole quadratic formula, but it tells you how many answers you're going to have. With a quadratic, going back to our parabola, you can either have two solutions, one solution if you only cross at the x, no solutions if you open down or open up above the x. So there are three possible quantity of solutions you can have with quadratics. If b squared minus 4ac is positive, if it's bigger than 0, you're going to have two answers. If it's equal to 0, you're only going to have one answer because the square root of 0 is only 0. And if it's less than 0, it means it's negative and you're going to have no solution. So let's try this. So it's asking you to solve using the quadratic formula. That means don't even try to factor. What is the quadratic formula?
X equals the opposite
b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a.
Cool. So step 1 is still going to be make sure it's in standard form and set equal to 0. Step 2 obviously is going to be make sure you know who A, B, and C are. And then you're going to punch it into that calculator after you set it up and making sure that you are manually doing the order of operations because your calculators don't all function with order of operations. So you would write x is equal to the opposite of 5, because that's what b is, plus or minus means you're going to add. You're going to go negative 5 plus whatever the square root of b squared is 25, right? Because 5 squared is 25. So b squared minus 4 times a, which is 6, times c, which is negative 4. And then all of that is being divided by 2 times a, which is 6. So then I have to do the order of operations, making sure that I'm working with what's inside of the square root as if it was a parentheses first. And so you're going to do x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25. So what we did is we did 2 times 6 already, and we saw that that was 12. And then 25 minus, we do 4 times 6, negative 4 times 6 is negative 24, and negative 24 multiplied by negative 4 is going to give you the value of positive 96. So the inside of the quadratic formula of the square root is really 25 plus 96, which is 121. And so we're going to take the square root of 121. and that's going to be 11. So we have negative 5 plus or minus 11, and then divided by 12, remembering that the plus and minus are telling you you're doing two different operations. You're going to do negative 5 plus 11, and then divide it by 12. And then you're going to do negative 5 minus 11, divided by 12. So negative 5 plus 11 is 6, and 6 over 12 is 1/2. That's one of the solutions. The other one is negative 5 minus 11, divided by 12. And negative 5 minus 11 is negative 16, divided by 12. Negative 16/12 is really negative 4/3. So those are your two answers right there. X is equal to 1/2 and X is equal to negative 4/3. So we're using the quadratic formula for this. We recognize that A is equal to 1, B is equal to positive 3, and C is equal to negative 7. The formula is X equals the opposite of B, where B is positive 3, so it's opposite of 3, which is negative 3, plus or minus the square root of B squared, so that's 3 squared, which is 9, minus 4 times A times C, which is negative 7, all divided by 2 times 1. Continuing the order of operations, I work with what's inside the parentheses, which is basically like the square root. So X is equal to negative 3 plus and then minus the square root of negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times negative 7 is positive 28. So it's really 9 plus 28, which is 37. And then all of that is divided by 2. The next thing that you do is you take the square root of 37, which if you do the square root of 37 on your calculator, and then you press the button that changes it if you have that calculator from that to a decimal.
Yeah.
6.08.
My bad.
So let's say 6.1. So, and then you are going to divide by 2 times 1, which is 2. Negative 3 plus 6.1 is 3.1, and that divided by 2 is 1.5. And then when you do negative 3 minus 6.1, you get negative 9.1, and then divide that by 2 and you get negative 4.55. So you get that X is equal to 1.55 and negative 4.55. For this part, it's asking me to, they're not asking me what are the solutions, it wants to know the number of solutions. Remember that the discriminant is what tells me how many solutions I am. So all I'm going to use is b squared minus 4ac. So I would say b is negative 2. Well, negative 2 squared minus 4 times a is 3 times c is 2. When you do the math, negative 2 squared is positive 4. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. 4 minus 24 is negative 20. That means that if I was to take the square root, it wouldn't be possible, and so this one is no solution. As opposed to this one, b squared minus 4ac, b is 11. 11 squared is 121, minus 4 times a, which is 2, and c, which is 12. I do my multiplication. 121 minus, well, 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 12 is 96. I'm going to get a positive answer. I don't even need to do the math. I just know I'm getting a positive. That means I have 2 solutions. Because you could take the square root of a positive and get positive and negative. I'm not solving for the x. I'm just saying how many solutions. And this one, b squared minus 4ac, b is 8. 8 squared is 64. Minus 4 times 1, which is a, times c, which is 16, gives me 64 minus 64, which is equal to 0. The square root of 0 is just one answer, 0. So that means I only have one solution. This is the only thing they ask you when they're asking you for the number of solutions. They're not asking you what is x equal to, use the quadratic formula, They're just asking how many solutions I have. So we're not going to do the graphing method because of the fact that we're doing that in 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, and 8.4. The factoring method, if we are looking at this problem here, is you are going, the quadratic trinomial is x squared plus 7x plus 10 is equal to 0. And so in order to solve by factoring, what you're going to do is you're going to factor like normal. Product of AC, sum of B. Oh, this is an easy. X plus 2 times x plus 5 is equal to 0. I'm going to set each parentheses equal to 0. Subtract 2 on both sides, and I get that x is negative 2. I'm going to set the x plus 5 equal to 0. I subtract 5 on both sides, and I get x is negative 5. And I get the answers negative 2 and negative 5 by factoring. Now, if I use the same exact problem, and I use the quadratic formula, you are going to notice that you're going to get the same answers. A is 1, B is 7, C is 10. X equals the opposite of B, which is 7, plus or minus the square root of B, which is 7, squared, which is 49, 7 squared, B squared, minus 4 times A times C, all over 2 times 1. With this, I just do the mathematics behind it. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to start from the middle. I get 7 squared is 49. Negative 7 plus or minus the square root of B squared gave you 49. 4 times 1 is 4 times 10 is 40. So 49 minus 40 is 9. All divided by 2. I made that square root a little bit too big. That's going to lead me to negative 7 plus whatever the square root of 9 is divided by 2. Well, the square root of 9 is 3. So negative 7 plus 3 divided by 2. And then the other would be negative 7 minus 3 divided by 2. And negative 7 minus 3 divided by 2. Then I work each one out independently. Negative 7 plus 3 is negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 2 is equal to negative 2. That's one answer. And negative 7 minus 3 is negative 10. And negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. So you notice that you get x is equal to negative 2 and negative 5. And you got the same answers as you did in this top one where it's negative 2 and negative 5 using a different method.